We are in Titus chapter 3. We are picking up in verse 12. This brings us, and we are in the midst of the conclusion. We looked last week at verses 9 through 11 and saw the early portion of the conclusion in which you have a number of exhortations that is typical of what you would find in this kind of an epistle. And so next we're going to look at and find what is another typical thing. We only think of it about New Testament, but it was actually very common within epistles, and that is travel plans. And that you typically would find at the end of an epistle after the exhortations, you'd have a series of travel plans. You're just letting people know, here's what I'm planning on doing, here's what what you're doing or what we're going to do, what we talked about. And that was, you find a section like that in most of the epistles if it was applicable in any way. And so that's where we are here. But that does not mean that there's not some valuable information, especially in a practical way, that we can find here. So I want us to begin. We'll just look at verse 12 as we begin this and then see how practical actually it can be. When we consider this, it says, When I send Artemis to you, or Tychicus, be diligent to come to me at, says, Nicopolis, for I've decided to spend the winter there. Now, when you look specifically at this, we don't know a lot about these individuals. You see Artemis, and there's not like you can go through and find anything there. Tychicus, we have a little bit more information about him. We see that he, during this time period, was with Paul and it would seem like he was serving as the amanuensis, or the secretary. And that in doing so, a lot of times what Paul would do was those people were, number one, writing down what Paul said. He would dictate his letters, and then Paul would sign them with his name and add maybe some little short thing. But then also, it was true that those people often would be the person who would then deliver the letter, would sometimes be that person. And that was the role that we find Tychicus in before. But there's going to be, as we're going to see, more to it than that. So we have these individuals, and he's going to send Artemis to you or Tychicus. So he's not sure yet right now. I'm going to send somebody to you. Now he left, remember, Titus. He sent him, put him in Crete to do this work. And now he's going to send somebody else to him. So this is what follows next. When I do that, be diligent to come to me at Nicopolis. He's just getting Titus started in this work he's got to do around the island. That's what this whole book has been about. So what does it tell you if he starts the book, and here's why I've left you, here's what I want you to do, here are your instructions. You are to appoint elders in every congregation throughout the island, and you are to set things in orders. Here are what I want you to do. And now at the end he's saying, I'm going to send somebody to you, and then you are to come meet me. How much time then was Paul giving Titus to do this work? Have you ever thought about it? It sounds like that this was not some just long-term, hey, well, eventually we need to get around to something, and, we need to handle these kind of things, but we don't want to rush and everything. That's 21st century kind of thinking. He's saying, get busy, because I'm going to need you here. So we're sending the letter. So the question is, when I send this, so now how is he going to do this then? He's sending a letter by someone else because he can't do the work when he gets the letter. Okay? He can't do that work if one of these men is immediately bringing the letter. So it's got to be they're coming a later time. So we don't know exactly the time frame in between, except that Paul has decided to spend the winter there, and therefore if he's going to do that, then we don't have some kind of long time thing in mind. We think this is probably in 63 AD, and if so, if that's the winter, then we're most likely seeing is that Paul would have been from what we see in 2 Timothy, you're talking about the end of 64 probably. And so you're just a little bit more than a year out from that. So here's what his plan is going to be. I know he's going to spend the winter there. No, just think about the work that he wants them to do. So he's got Artemis and Tychicus. They are there, and they are going to be there, and they're doing whatever Paul tells them to do. They're sending. What were they going to do when they went to Titus? Whoever ended up going, what was the role? We don't see these people very often. What would the role have been? If he was saying Titus needed to leave and join him, they're picking up. The role of whoever ends up coming in is going to be picking up for where Titus left off. So Titus, I need you to get things going, and then I'm going to give you some time, and then these men, or one of these men, is going to join you there. When they get here, they will take up from where you are. You are going to come meet me, because I'm going to be at Nicopolis, which indicates that he's not necessarily there right now. This is just where he's planning on going. Okay, so now that brings up, where is Nicopolis? It's a trick question. All right, John. A long ways off? Well, if you're traveling by ship, that's not far though, right? There's actually more than one Nicopolis. So which one is it? There's more than one Nicopolis. Stan? The what? The Fritos? That's a chip. Say that again. Oh, okay. Epirus. Though I like the idea of Fritos better. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Nicopolis is what we think is probably the one that makes the most sense within Paul's travel plans. What do we know about what Paul wanted to do during this time frame? We don't know for sure if he ever made it to Spain. We know from the book of Romans he wanted to go to Spain. Now, after his first imprisonment then, if we take it for granted that he would have tried to get to Spain, because if you look at the journeys, Paul's journeys were a constant loop. I'll do it this way for you. I'll keep going further west. Every time he went somewhere, it was a gradual expansion throughout the Roman Empire until he'd essentially covered the whole Roman Empire. It was very systematic. So wanting to go, most likely then he was, if he could, go to Spain, but then he was always coming back, and he was going to winter Nicopolis, which would put you closer in, leaving maybe that area, wherever he was. But Nicopolis would have been up on the peninsula, the Achaean Peninsula, north of Corinth. And on the western side is most likely where this would have been. Spend the winter there. And why would he have wanted to do that? Why would you just wait in this, I'm going to spend the winter somewhere? Do we know this from the book of Acts, why you might want to do that? Weather, because of the weather makes travel hard in the Mediterranean. It makes ship travel very hard, and that they learned that the hard way. Well, Paul knew, but they ignored that, and that's why they ended up having a shipwreck. So what do? You choose to winter different places, and that affects your travel. All right, so we move on. We go into verse 13 now, and this is yet another kind of thing. He's going to tell them about somebody else's travel plans. Send Zenas the lawyer and Apollos on their journey with haste, that they may lack nothing. We've got Zenas the lawyer. Now, this is interesting because what type of lawyer was he? Well, that could have been maybe his background, and that he would have been known by that. That is possible. If you take it, but if so, then when you look at Zenas, is that a Jewish name? That's a Greek name. So if it's a Greek name, then we can pretty much, if that's what he went by, then the chances are he was not a Jew that was known by that name. If he was, it's not impossible, because obviously you could have a Greek name still as a Jew, though usually what we're finding is they would have had a Roman name, a Latin name more than less. Like you'd have Paul was his Roman name, Mark was the Roman name, versus Saul and John. So I don't know that we see that with Greek the same way. So the likelihood is that we're dealing with someone who is Greek in background. But if that's the case, then if he's a lawyer, what does that mean? No, it doesn't. By the way, we can't rule that out entirely, that it was associated with the Old Testament law. If it would have gone way back, and it would be because of Apollos, right? Because what kind of name is Apollos? That is a Greek name too, but yet you've got a Jew. So there we have, if he's associated with Apollos, it is Zeus, then guess what? It's possible he was a Jew with a Greek name, right? So guess what? We don't know at all. That's the point. Okay. If he was a Jew, and the law, this is the same word no matter what, that is describing someone who was a scribe, right? And it would have been closer to the idea of, when you talk about someone who was a lawyer and fulfilling that role, it was an expert. We think of it more as being an expert. Okay, when you think about people who did the law in a Roman style thing, which that would have been pretty unusual outside of Rome to have that kind of role. So that part of history, I would say, points it more toward being a Jewish type of law. All right, let's move on to the practicality of this, though, since we got to get away from things we don't know for sure. We know Apollos. We know his work from what we saw in Acts chapter 18. We know also there's more extensive interaction, not directly but indirectly, with Paul, as we see in 1 Corinthians. And Paul had great respect for Apollos and his work. So now we find these two, and they are traveling, which is interesting because it reminds us of something we sometimes forget. The book of Acts centers the second half on Paul's journeys. And because of that, we don't have a record of Barnabas' journeys after the first one with Paul, right? We don't have that record. Well, what do we find here? We've got two more people that were traveling in a pair doing missionary work. Okay. So, just in terms of deepening our understanding and getting us to think a little bit, I want us to understand that when you see what Paul was doing, it is recorded for the purpose of showing the spread of the gospel throughout the Roman Empire, which was they called the known world, right? That was their terminology for it of that time. You know, I like to try to point out to people that Paul, if you look at that map, Paul went all over the place. Everyone, I want to go overseas and be like Paul. Paul never left the country. He always was in the Roman Empire, people. Okay? So he may have gotten out of Texas, but he stayed in the United States. So just to keep that in mind. But the point is that there were other people doing similar things. We don't have a full history of all the work that was going on. This same kind of model that you have Paul doing on his individual scale as an apostle, it shows that there were other individuals who were doing it who were not apostles, that were doing it on a smaller scale. And we know from the work of what we find in Colossians that there were people there that congregation was established by people who learned from Paul in Ephesus, so there were people doing it on an even smaller scale. And that was what was happening throughout the world, wherever the apostles went, that you had this kind of model set up. And this is one verse to remind us that all of these people were doing tremendous work. And you hear about it that much maybe. This is just a sample of someone that there were a lot of examples of this going on. This is just a sampling of how the Christians spread the gospel. And it's important for this reason. We should not think that the Apostle Paul was a superhero and that the entire spread of the gospel was his work. He was central to it in the Roman Empire, no question about it. That was his role, to say, take the gospel to the Gentiles. In that terminology, it's to the Romans. Everybody else, when they left Judea, was going to the Gentiles. Okay? His job was to cover the Roman Empire. That was the assignment. But in doing so, there were other people who were taking from that and using it. Why do I bring that up? So that we understand the nature of how God has always had the gospel being spread was a series of interconnected circles of people with varying levels of influence, from a well-known preacher to someone connected that learned from him, that someone connected and learned to him, the people that each one of them are dealing with that are interconnected and all working together. That's how they spread the gospel. And that's key for us to keep in mind, that the spreading of the gospel is not one man's work. It never has been, and we need to make sure we change that in the way we think. LaGuardia? Yeah. He was an eloquent man. Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that there would be, okay, good. I want to take that and go with it. So if, because of Apollos' background, and then if we take Zenos as be a lawyer in the Old Testament, then they would pair up well as far as the approach they would take. If that's the case, though, particularly, you would expect them, like what did Paul do? He always went to the Jews first. That argumentation would be important in Jewish areas. It'd be more important in Jewish areas. Now, it says, though, Paul talking to Titus, he says, send Zenos the lawyer and Apollos on their journey with haste. Send them forward, is the literal wording, diligently. That's the wording. Send them forth diligently. What is Paul telling Titus to do? To what? To support them. How? Good, excellent. To provide whatever provisions they need to make their work that they are journeying through possible. We don't often see it like we should. This is actually a theme in multiple books of making sure that whenever someone comes through and they're teaching the truth, you're making it more possible for them to teach more wherever they go. Don't put they're taking already some, they're taking some risks. They're maybe taking a financial hardship on. When you get them, you make sure and take care of them and make it as easy as possible on them to do their work as you can. Whatever you can do to help them. That's all he is saying. So I think y'all covered that really well. Is whatever you can do. That can be a lot of things. What are within your ability to do. Putting them up. Give them a place to stay. Make sure they're fed. Let's make sure they get some rest. All of those things. It's possible. Again, we don't know for sure, but it would be possible. Since he doesn't say I'm sending them out, but since they are going to be with Titus, because that's where the relevance of all this is, so that's not a bad thought, because the others are going to wait and be at the end portion of Titus' work, and that these could be the immediate ones. Absolutely a possibility. Okay. But notice that the purpose, that they may lack nothing. Okay? Now, go ahead, Bill.
Things that you were talking about a moment ago, Paul wrote Timothy in 2 Timothy 2 and 2, the things that you've heard from me and among many witnesses, the same you take to teach others.
Right.
That's exactly what he was doing. That's what you were talking about a moment ago.
Yes, absolutely. So you think about this, the job is to make sure they don't lack anything. And so that they don't have to. The reason why part of this is we don't think about it in a I think today the same way is because we just kind of take a more modern and American kind of approach to it. But in terms of what it would have taken to financially to make some of these trips, it's still, you had to get fare, you had to be able to travel, you had to be able to still eat, and it was not easy. Travel was not that easy when you see what all they were doing. It wasn't like you didn't have hotels you could hit up and that was easy. Hotels were one of two types, okay? They were 5-star Hilton or brothels. Okay, that's a sin, well, not exactly brothels, it's more the seedy motel down the street. Okay, not here. But that's kind of the two extremes a lot of times they had. Most people, if you wanted a good place to stay, you're staying with people you know. Okay? And so that's why it was so important to do that, to take care of them. It was more personal. We can still do this, and it won't be quite as personal. If you put some up at a hotel, you're still helping out. I think we sometimes lose a little bit by not taking some advantage of a more personal kind of relationships building that we could do at times. But it still is key. And the thing is don't make it hard. It's really good. I think Brethren as a whole are pretty good about this. I can only think of maybe a couple of times that, at least it's not more than one hand that when I went to speak somewhere that I ended up, it was a financial hit for me to have done it. Usually at least I break even. So, but there are times in which that's not even a concern for people. They're just, here you go. They don't consider what you're doing. And
it's a big thing, Tim, and like you were saying, it's not like they could just have, I'm now in, Italy or whatever it was, that let me run to the ATM and somebody transfer me some money and take it. They needed to be, it's such a little line, but it means so much because for them to be able to effectively do their work, they needed to be prepared and have all the resources so that they weren't, great, now I'm stuck here and can't, it wasn't a quick fix for them to run out of supplies and get that taken care of.
right. And that's exactly right. It wasn't easy. It was a quick fix. And that's also why they needed to be able to work some to tie them over. They would get the support as they went. You see that with Philippi, of adding support to be able to, so you didn't have to. I mean, otherwise they were just having to, and it's being willing to take up that extra. Well, why? So that more work can be done. It's not that we couldn't find somebody who could fill a pulpit while working another job. I'm telling you, you're not going to get the same kind of instruction. You're not going to be able to do the same kind of work because you're spending all that time doing other stuff. So can you do it? Yes. If we think of it, if it's just about doing the real minimum, we can just get by. But that's getting by is the wrong attitude, isn't it? We're just going to get by as the church. So we need to understand why they would be willing to do as much as they did. Okay. Y'all don't want me to finish. I know what it is. I know what you're doing.
No,
I read the minds.
That we're given what we're given for our learning, for our,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not important, but if you sit back and think, how many other people were out there that Paul, that we don't necessarily have to include because we don't have letters because we don't need them, that were doing other journeys, that were doing other missions. I mean, you can't imagine that it was just these couple people.
Right.
I mean, it had to be.
That's good. That leads us to verse 14. That's a professional segue, everybody. You'll pay attention. Okay. See what I did there, Brian? No. You had your chance. Let me read the verse, Philip, and then you can comment. And let our people also learn to maintain good works, to meet urgent needs, that they may not be unfruitful. This is connected. He's including the rest of the people in what Titus is being told to do. Titus should not be the only one to do this. And, okay, now Phil.
Well, I was just thinking, depending
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes to get from one place to another safely, you needed some type of here's who sent me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's why I'm here. Here's what I'm doing. Here's the type of credentials. And that's very, very normal to do that. Absolutely. So notice what he's telling them to do. Let's tie this together. Let our people, okay, notice people's implied, but ours, okay, let all of us also learn to maintain good works. Now, the word maintain, I do not like that translation. Because we've seen this word before already. It has to do with kind of the idea of stand forward, stand up, be noticed. Okay, and it's related to a word that's even used of leadership regarding elders, but it's being in the forefront. Okay, so you're being the forefront of good works, of good activities. The difference is between, are you the person, if you're in the forefront, you're right there, you're eager, you're ready to go, versus the person hanging back saying, somebody can do it, please, somebody else take it, please.
Is it more of the
No one can see me.
Yeah, I read it as more of the thought is be a leader, be a strong example in good works, not
Yeah,
just
you're being in the forefront. The main idea of this is visibility. Okay, if I remember the word correctly, in its history, and I don't want to have an etymological fallacy here, but I recognize that tone. It's a ring. But when you go back, you see all this and that they're doing it, maintaining and standing forward. It's the idea that was used in its origin of a shopkeeper who stood out front, trying to pull people in. You ever been to some small shops like in a outside the country where they're trying to pull you in? Right? Mexico, remember? They're trying to direct traffic through their shop. Yeah, that's what he's talking about. It being so obvious and clear that people are seeing. And how are you doing this? Good works. You're showing people who you are. And in this context, it's you make sure those things are taken care of. Why? But where do you need to focus on? To meet urgent needs. It's interesting. He's got two different words stacked together. Really, both have the idea of need or necessity. Like necessary needs is kind of what he's saying. The things that really matter. So when we're choosing what to do in our work, we need to be evaluating what is really needed. And then that can be very different. Had a woman, this has been a long time ago, stopped by the house years ago. We were living in Wellington. They really hungry, need something to eat. Now, Tracy and I didn't have anything. I mean, we really didn't have much. And I think we offered her a banana, peanut butter and jelly. And she didn't want, no. She did not. You know what she took? A Twinkie. A Twinkie. Of all the things, I mean, in terms of personal nourishment, I can't think of a Twinkie as being my go-to, right? Okay? She wasn't hungry. She wanted something. When we think of needs, we need to make sure that what we're doing is when, and this is in this context of people coming along, that we really are mindful of what is needed, what is really needed, and that we're taking care of that, and that we're prioritizing. So that if you're looking around what you do as the work of the church, are you doing the things that are needed, or are you doing the things that are, this would be nice for me. If that's the background, someone needs to come around and, I don't need a shoe shine. That's nice. I don't need my shoes shine. That's a luxury. We are to the point of confusing sometimes what is a luxury in the work of the church versus necessities of the work of the church. And we need to make sure we're fulfilling our necessities before we ever think about moving on to something we call a luxury. Okay? And that's what he's doing. Why? That they may not be unfruitful. The end idea is we want to make sure that there is the proper kind of thing produced. Whenever you come with the idea of fruit in the nature of how it serves as a metaphor in the New Testament, it's the idea of being fruitful is productive. There's a proper product at the end. And that something comes out of it, whereas otherwise you get something, there's nothing there. It's a easiest way to think of it is, can we be very busy as a congregation and yet not really be working to produce anything of spiritual value? Is that possible? I'm not asking for anybody to provide confessions here. I'm saying, do you understand how that can happen in a congregation, though? You can be busy with a lot of things. You can have a full calendar. You can be flitting here and there. It's like, I like to tell people about families. It's like, just because you're taking your kids to soccer practice, to over here, to this thing, to the mall, to get that, that doesn't mean you're being a good parent. You're just being a taxi driver, right? So, the relationship, is that part of kind of what goes with it? Well, it can. But that in itself, the activity alone is not evidence of that you're doing something productive. Okay? The productive part is actually in the more substantive things of the interaction. And that's what we need to make sure we're about in the church. All right, verse 15. I will not be stopped. I am determined. I stopped? Oh, no, okay. All who are with me greet you. Greet those who love us in the faith. Grace be with you all. Amen. Okay, when you get to the end of a letter, you're going to have this final greetings, right? Tell people hi. Right? How would you do that otherwise? Do you do that on the phone? Tell people hi? We do that all the time. You know, Tracy's talking to her mom or dad on the phone. I walk by. I tell them hi. I love them. You just do that. Okay, so he says, you tell them hi. Do you understand, going back to Brian's point about how difficult it was to get things done, how important it would have meant to get a letter? How many letters did the people of Crete ever hear from people, number one? Hear from fellow Christians, or hear from an apostle? All who are with me greet you. Now, he just has named some people who are with him in some capacity. What does they say? They all say hi. Hey, Titus, you know why that matters? Preachers, why does that matter? Why not? Encourages? Well, no, these guys, they're too young. They don't understand. Let me tell you. Let me tell you, preaching is a lonely work. It's a lonely work. Because, not because you're not around people you love, it's because y'all have a great situation. Usually you're the only one there that has any understanding of what exactly you're trying to accomplish. And because of that, you hear, and the benefit of hearing all these other people that maybe Titus knew these people. He's left because Paul needs him to do the work. The Lord needs him to do the work. He's left, but Paul says they all say hi. Let me tell you what, I'll get a note from somebody. We get phone, I get a text, and I will tell you, I'll get one. I'll be teaching in the middle of class. I can remember one. Y'all can appreciate this, guys. But I was teaching in the middle of the class, and I look down on because I usually my iPad, and all of a sudden it gives a message. Steve Lloyd. Oh, that was nice. What does Steve want? It's a great feeling. I've known him for 25, almost 30 years. And you go over and you look at those kind of things and you say, it means something to hear. I heard from a friend, he's not in good health. He called me today. He needed to hear from my voice. He just had 4 stents put in. And he's just pretty much realizing that he doesn't have much longer to live. Okay? And that's probably more, I think, a sentiment you're going to find at the end of 2 Timothy. But you need to understand these are real people going through real emotions, and that these greetings that we just run through so quickly at some of these times, that was real emotion with every single one of those. Don't forget that when you read over them. If it was your name there, what would it mean to you? Greet those who love us in the faith. How many people on Crete would have known Paul? Probably not very many, if any, would they? Would they have known who Paul was? Yeah. Because there would have been connections. And some might have left and moved. And they knew him, and then they went to Crete, and that's why they were there. He says, greet those who love us in the faith. Now, if you look, and we sometimes assume things about these words. This word for love is not it's not agapao. It's phileo. Why? Because the established relationship is there. The relationship exists. It's in the faith. And that faith means we already have something in common that matters, which is what phileo love is really all about. It's what draws us together, makes us brethren. You tell them, I say hi. And he closes, as he so often does, grace be with you all. Amen. Now, I always like to point out it's like, what a nice sentiment. God is implied in this. It's God's favor be with you all. God's the one to bless you. But he had implied this early in the letter. We talk about grace. If you go back to chapter 1, and he starts the letter with that idea. But then it's included in the 2 major theological passages. Grace, grace, grace. So what do you have? You have grace as an understanding of that this is only because God blesses it that we have this relationship. God blessed us with Jesus Christ, and that's his grace in action. God provided salvation for all of us. Chapter 3, grace in action. And I want you to continue to make sure that you understand that what we all enjoy is due to what God has already done. So if you think about grace being having the idea of God's favor and opportunity that he provides, and that's what Paul is saying he wants Titus to enjoy. That God will bless him in the work that he's just been assigned. And that he'll have the opportunities available to carry it out. That it's more than, yes, is it theological, but it's also very practical. And thinking about this. Okay, it is 8 o'clock. I have left some sheets at the back for you. And I did this earlier today because I did not provide it earlier. So I decided to go through and put it together an exegetical outline rather than an expositional outline. Y'all have fun with that one. So this is exegetical of just a way to understand how this book is arranged now that we've gone through it. And I didn't have time to do all that. I didn't know how much time we'd have, but I wanted to make sure you could have that to be able to look back through and have something to kind of follow to see the book as a whole.